the Vice President of the United States, just delivered an absolutely incredible speech here. In Las Vegas, he said that Bitcoin is a strategically important asset. Hundreds of millions of people will hold Bitcoin. But there's also some criticism that we need to take a look at. On top of that, Pakistan has now officially announced a strategic Bitcoin reserve here in Las Vegas. And now there was the mega announcement from the mayor of New York, who actually said here that he wants to introduce Bitbonds in New York. That's really huge. We're going to take a look at these two major statements here. And yes, I know there's always some criticism when people say, okay, all these politicians who are now jumping on the Bitcoin bandwagon and blah, 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 they're just lying to us too. We're going to look at both sides. We're not just going to look at the good sides here. We're also going to take a real look at the legitimate criticism. Right after these speeches, the Bitcoin price didn't skyrocket. In fact, it did the exact opposite, which is already kind of contradictory. If it's supposed to be so bullish, then why is the Bitcoin price being sold off here? We're going to take a look at that too. But first, go ahead and leave me a like and subscribe down below so we can keep things rolling here. The Bitcoin price needs all the support it can get right now. I need every like and every possible subscription here so we can really take off and get these videos out to even more people. The whole thing was super hyped, especially with the JD Vance speech. There was also the dinner and so on. And a lot of people were expecting some kind of huge announcement or something. There wasn't any announcement here. That needs to be made absolutely clear right from the start. There wasn't an announcement like, okay, the US is buying 1 million Bitcoin or something like that. What we got here was just further confirmation of how bullish the US is on Bitcoin. Let's listen in now. Afterwards, we'll also talk about the Bitbonds here. One thing that, in my opinion, is actually an even bigger story, but hasn't gotten nearly as much hype here, is the Bitbonds, which are a massive deal. I've said this before. Bitbonds could, in the long run, even make the Fed irrelevant, that is, the US central bank. That would be the bullish scenario, which could play out over the long term. First, let's listen to JD Vance and hear exactly what he has to say. And sorry for the confusion, but this is actually an update, because what I'm recording right now is being added after the video was already finished. That's because this whole thing with Pakistan just came up. So I'm quickly inserting this here before we get to JD Vance. There's an announcement now, and before we get to JD Vance, let's quickly listen in to what the crypto, well, I don't remember exactly who he is. The crypto chief from Pakistan, that's what he's called here, has to say about Bitcoin, because the FOMO is real.
Today is a very historic day because today
I will announce that the Pakistani government is setting up their own government-led Bitcoin strategic reserve.
So you heard it. It's pretty intense, more and more Bitcoin reserves. But if you've been listening closely here, I've already talked about this recently, so this shouldn't really surprise you. Pakistan is also going to do Bitcoin mining and much more. That's already the first big announcement. But now, let's move on with JD Vance.
And when it comes to crypto, I think the last several years have made it clear that we're talking about genuine, ground-up innovation, one that's already improving the well-being of tens of millions of our fellow citizens. I believe it's 50 million Americans own Bitcoin, and I believe that's going to be 100 million before too long.
And that's definitely a pretty bold statement right there. That means there are 50 million people in the US. But it won't take long before there are hundreds of millions of people in the US holding Bitcoin as well. He also says here that it's a superior technology, no question, but you really have to stay critical. He's not just talking about Bitcoin here, he's also moving into the broader crypto space, basically throwing it over the entire industry again. And that's something people often strongly criticize. I don't know if they're doing that on purpose or if it's unintentional. If you're deep down the rabbit hole, you definitely make a clear distinction between Bitcoin and crypto. There were also a lot of people saying, for example, that JD Vance doesn't really know what he's talking about, because otherwise he wouldn't have said crypto here and kept mixing up crypto with Bitcoin. It's possible that he just had this idea handed to him. I mean, it didn't seem like he was just reading off a script or anything. But yeah, I'm really unsure. For example, the Winklevoss twins said, hey, JD Vance definitely gets it. David Bailey said JD Vance gets it. But there was also some criticism in the comments. Feel free to share your opinion in the comments below. Do you think JD Vance really gets it here? Or is he just putting on his show for us? But the really wild statements are just about to come.
Soon by about 50 million, because a lot of Americans have made a lot of money, have created a lot of wealth for themselves, and that's a great thing. But I actually think that where Bitcoin is going is as a strategically important asset for the United States over the next decade. It's one of the reasons why President Trump, with the help of our great AI guy, David Sachs, it's one of the reasons why we started the Bitcoin Reserve.
So he's saying, it's great that a lot of people have made a lot of money with Bitcoin, but in the long run, Bitcoin is really a strategic reserve or a very, very important strategic asset for the US. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that. If you understand that, just like the internet is strategically important, and just like AI is strategically important, so is this. You can't afford to sleep on this. You can either say, okay, we're going to get involved, or we're not, but if we don't, our competitors and others will just leave us in the dust, because they'll be much more innovative, much better positioned, and have way better opportunities to save. It even goes as far as Jason Lowery's software theory, which describes that there will be hash wars, that there will be Bitcoin accumulation wars, and much more, and that even warfare itself will shift into cyberspace in the future. I mean, that's still a pretty far-fetched idea, but we can already see that hash rate is being built up in different countries. That would, of course, be the ultra bull case or the wildest Bitcoin scenario that could play out.
It's one of the reasons why we started the Bitcoin Reserve, because we want to start to put in motion the strategic importance of Bitcoin for the United States government. We know that the PRC doesn't like Bitcoin. The People's Republic of China doesn't like Bitcoin. Well, we should be asking ourselves, why is that? Why is our biggest adversary such an opponent of Bitcoin? And if the Communist Republic of China is leaning away from Bitcoin, then maybe the United States ought to be leaning into Bitcoin. And that's one of the things that we're going to be doing.
And honestly, you can say whatever you want about politicians and so on, but this was really the crucial point. In the end, that's exactly what I always tell you. Countries that support Bitcoin often stand for freedom. They tend to have a more freedom-oriented approach. Countries that oppose Bitcoin are often socialist. They tend to have censorship, surveillance systems, and so on. I'm not saying that the USA is the freest country in the world, but countries that embrace Bitcoin tend to share more freedom-oriented values. And countries like the EU or others like China, which close themselves off in this regard, simply don't have that. I'm not entirely sure if his conclusion here is correct, whether China is really being portrayed as hostile toward Bitcoin, or if they're just trying to hide Bitcoin from their citizens or make it difficult for them. There are even rumors that China might actually have more Bitcoin than the USA. We had Bitcoin mining. Well, at least we used to have it back then. By now, we even have Bitcoin treasury companies in China. I think we're already on the second one. So I'm not so sure if he's right in his conclusion. I mean, Donald Trump always says we have to stay ahead of China, making similar statements, and we just have to see how things develop geopolitically. I think they also know that China probably isn't just sitting back and watching blindly. They're not stupid either. But China just has a different strategy than the US. The US has a more open strategy. It's possible that China has a somewhat more closed-off strategy here. I'm not entirely sure about that, because China is very, very hard to read.
The rules, the red tape, and the lawfare that we saw aimed at crypto by our predecessors. We're ending the weaponization of federal regulations against this community. To put it simply, Operation Choke Point 2.0 is dead, and it's not coming back under the Trump administration.
And it's really important here to make a very clear statement. No, there will be no more anti-Bitcoin or anti-crypto stories. Operation Choppin' 2.0 is over. And that was always the point of uncertainty with the previous government. Back then, you never knew, okay, are you going to get locked up now? Is it allowed? Is it not allowed? And so on. And with Gary Gensler, it's also being said that this whole story is now over. Elizabeth Warren and all those other people, whatever their names were. And you have to say, so far it's basically a copycat speech of what Trump said last year. Trump actually said pretty much the same things, but he probably went a bit further because he made his statements in a more populist way. J.D. Vance basically just echoed what Trump already said last year. Bitcoin is important. Crypto is important. It's a strategic, long-term asset. We need to roll back the fight against regulation here. We need to open things up in the US. The whole crypto and Bitcoin community here is really great. He also mentioned blockchain, stablecoins, blah blah blah, at least in part. So, I'm not 100% convinced. There were parts one found really, really interesting, but honestly, I have to say, I'm not completely convinced. But the announcement I found way more impressive was this one, from the mayor of New York. Not the janitor, but the mayor. In the last video, I accidentally said janitor. That was, of course, a slip of the tongue. Go ahead and write it down in the comments below. Everyone who noticed it, some people probably didn't even catch it. Let's hit play real quick and listen to what he says. In my opinion, this is one of the most powerful things that could happen for Bitcoin. Sure, for now this might just be in New York, but it could be the start of something really, really big.
We have financial instruments for all other bonds. You can have tax-exempt bonds, and other bonds. It is time, for the first time in the history of this city, to have a financial instrument that is made for those who are holders of Bitcoin. I believe we need to have a Bitbond, and I am going to push and fight to get a Bitbond in New York so you can do those same bond investments in New York City. Thinking big and being unafraid of the future is what we want to do.
He's really bringing out the big guns here. That almost sounds like a Martin Luther King Jr. speech or something. I have a dream, and now we have the Bitcoin bonds, and we will launch them now. Let me know in the comments if you can spot any parallels. Anyway, to sum up what she's saying here, there are tons and tons of financial instruments, but there still aren't any financial instruments for bonds and for Bitcoin holders. Sure, there's Strike and maybe Strive from MicroStrategy, but there aren't any real Bitbonds, and I've explained the concept several times already. That means regular government bonds are becoming less and less popular, and the same goes for regular corporate bonds and things like that. If a government, a company, or a country wants to raise funds now, of course they can issue a bond, but the returns are often really, really poor. And yes, by now, some of them aren't even considered default-proof anymore. We're also seeing rating agencies downgrading the US and so on. But what if you over-collateralize a bond? For example, every time you issue a bond, you issue it together with a small portion of Bitcoin that gets added to the bond, which you then purchase as well. This means that now the issuer can also pay a higher yield, because Bitcoin will likely generate an excess return here. On the other hand, both sides have extra collateral. That means if something happens to the bond, you still have the Bitcoin in the background, and the Bitcoin will probably increase much more than the bonds. That means, over time, the collateral function here becomes even more significant. In other words, the over-collateralization keeps increasing, and this allows you to offer people money or interest with even greater security and even higher returns. So you have to say, people are getting interest, and the city is getting money. It can do things like raise money, start stacking Bitcoins at the same time, and offer people a better return. And people end up with an even better return for themselves. What's good for them is that they have higher security than with a regular bond, and the city bond might pay out at 10 or 15%, while a normal bond from the city would only pay out at 5 or 6% or something like that. I don't know what the current interest rates are for municipal bonds here. I didn't even know that municipal bonds like that actually exist, but yeah, it's already been considered in many countries. For example, the volcano bonds here in El Salvador and in various other countries. But now they're starting here in New York, and it could go so far that other treasury companies start offering something like this, that other countries offer it, other cities, and much more. If you're bullish on Bitcoin right now, I'll put a link below for 20 in a Bitcoin. Here you can easily register and buy Bitcoin. With the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. And actually, I just had a conversation with Benny Mutlak, so I really have to give him a shout out as well. This is his book here. He was also a guest here on my channel. New Money for a Free World. Why the monetary system should not be a tool of domination. Definitely check it out as well. Take a look at Benny Mutlak's work. I'll also put a link for you down below. This book is an absolute must-read. Of course, it's a real heavyweight, 500 pages long. I haven't read it all the way through, but I've definitely skimmed it, and I'm always in touch with Benny. So, it really covers everything, from the creation of money to the founding of the Federal Reserve, to different monetary alternatives, the Austrian school, and much more. So definitely give it a read. I'll put the link down below if you're interested. I'm not getting any money or anything for this. This is just a favor for Benny because he's doing really great work here and things like this deserve support. Stop by there and we'll see you. See you then. Peace out.